No housekeeper had survived more than 3 days with Beckett Dunmore's daughter. Not the one from the agency who had cried in her car. Not the retired schoolteacher who had lasted exactly 47 minutes before texting her resignation from the upstairs bathroom. Not even the woman with 20 years of experience and a laminated reference letter who had taken one look at 7-year-old Edie and quietly let herself out the front door of the Dunmore house on West 37th Avenue, Vancouver, never to return. Then Marisol Vega arrived. She arrived 12 minutes late, carrying a tote bag with a cartoon avocado on it, wearing paint-stained overalls over a yellow t-shirt and a pair of mismatched socks, one with tiny cacti, one with tiny clouds. Her dark curls were pinned up in a clip that was clearly losing the battle. She'd taken the wrong SkyTrain stop, run 4 blocks in October drizzle, and somehow still managed to look like she wasn't the least bit sorry about any of it. She pressed the doorbell and waited. The door opened, and Beckett Dunmore stood there in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, a 2009 Civic with a cracked bumper, and looked at her the way a person looks at a delivery that arrived damaged. "You're the housekeeper." It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. "I prefer household manager," Marisol said pleasantly, "but sure." Beckett stared at her socks. She didn't apologize for them. "You're late." "I am, the SkyTrain." "Doesn't matter." He stepped aside and let her in. "My daughter is upstairs. She doesn't speak much. She doesn't like noise. She will test you. Every single one before you is quit." He said it with the flatness of someone reading a risk disclosure. "I'd prefer you didn't quit on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are terrible for my schedule." Marisol looked at the house. Enormous, spotless. Cold in the way that expensive houses sometimes were, like a showroom no one actually lived in. There were no drawings on the fridge, no shoes by the door, no sign that a child was anywhere in the building, except for one small purple mitten sitting alone on the hall table, looking wildly out of place. "What's her name?" "Edie." "How old?" 7. "What does she like?" A pause. Beckett Dunmore, CEO of Dunmore Capital, a man who could close a $40 million deal before his second coffee, looked briefly uncertain. "She likes drawing, mostly houses." Marisol nodded. She picked up the purple mitten from the table and tucked it into her pocket. "Right," she said. "I'll go introduce myself." She found Edie at the top of the stairs, sitting on the landing with a sketchbook open on her knees, watching. The girl had her father's dark eyes and her own expression, careful, measuring, like someone who had been let down enough times that waiting felt safer than hoping. "Hi," Marisol said from the bottom of the stairs. She didn't go up. She just sat down on the second step and opened her tote bag. "I'm Marisol. I'm not going to pretend we're already friends because that's weird. But I brought markers." Silence. "The good kind. The ones that smell like fruit." A pause, then what kind of fruit? "Strawberry, mango, and one that's supposed to be kiwi but smells more like green apple." Marisol held one up. "Want to test it?" Edie came down the stairs slowly. She sat 2 steps above Marisol and held out her hand. Marisol passed up the green marker. Edie uncapped it, sniffed it, and announced, "Green apple." "Told you." That was the beginning. It was not, however, the easy beginning Marisol might have hoped for. By the end of the first morning, Edie had poured an entire glass of orange juice onto the kitchen table to see if it would make a river, had informed Marisol that the last housekeeper had been boring, and had disappeared for 22 minutes, during which Marisol searched every room on the main floor before finding her inside the kitchen cupboard, reading. "Why are you in the cupboard?" Marisol asked. "I like small spaces." "Fair enough." Marisol sat down cross-legged on the kitchen floor. "What are you reading?" Edie held up the book. It was a library copy about deep-sea fish. "Did you know anglerfish females absorb the males after mating?" she said. "They just fuse together and the male stops being his own thing. That's genuinely disturbing." "I know," Edie almost smiled. "I like it." Beckett came home that evening to find Marisol and Edie at the kitchen table, with what appeared to be an entire ocean ecosystem spread across the surface. Blue construction paper, marker-drawn fish, paper sea monsters hanging from the overhead light with string. He stopped in the doorway. "What happened to my kitchen?" "We made the deep sea," Edie said, not looking up. "This is the anglerfish. This is the blobfish. This one is the giant isopod, which Marisol thought was fake, but it's real. It looked fake, Marisol said, mildly defensive. I stand by that reaction. Beckett looked at the paper isopod. He looked at Marisol. He looked at the blue paint that had apparently gotten onto the edge of his marble countertop. My countertop. Comes off with warm water and a bit of dish soap, Marisol said. Washable paint. I checked the label twice. She held up the bottle. See? Says washable right there. It's on Italian marble. And it will come off the Italian marble. I promise you, no marble was permanently harmed in the making of this ocean. Beckett pinched the bridge of his nose. Edie, meanwhile, had gone back to drawing a creature she was calling a sparkle squid, adding it to the ecosystem with complete serenity. She ate dinner, Marisol added quietly, coming to stand beside him. All of it. And she talked to me for 6 hours straight. I don't know if you know this, but your daughter has a genuinely alarming amount of knowledge about marine biology. Beckett looked at Edie. She usually doesn't. He stopped. Eat? Talk to new people. Marisol said nothing. She just picked up a sponge and began working on the countertop edge. The paint came clean in 45 seconds. Beckett watched this and said nothing at all, which was somehow louder than anything he could have said. Edie slept through the night. This was, Beckett would later admit, something that had not happened in 8 months. Not since her mother Céline had left. Not died, left, packed a bag and moved to Montreal because she had found the life she actually wanted, and it did not include West 37th Avenue or Beckett Dunmore or, apparently, Edie. That was the part Beckett never said out loud. He would say, Edie has been going through a difficult adjustment. He would say, it's been a challenging year. He would not say, her mother chose to go and Edie knows it, and 7 years old is too young to carry that, and I don't know how to make it lighter. Marisol didn't know any of this yet on her second morning. She just noticed that when she arrived and let herself in, with the spare key Beckett had left on the counter, Edie came down the stairs rubbing her eyes, looking soft and slow, in a way that seemed different from the watchful child of the day before. You came back, Edie said. I said I would. Edie considered this. The last one said she would too. Then she was wrong to say it when she didn't mean it. Marisol set her bag down. I'm going to make eggs. Do you like them scrambled or are you a fried egg person? Scrambled, with cheese. A person of culture. Good. That morning went fine. The afternoon went mostly fine, except for the part where Edie decided to show Marisol her favorite place in the whole house, which turned out to be a small room at the end of the upstairs hall that had an oddly heavy lock on the door. A grown-up lock, a deadbolt, on a door at the end of a children's hallway. Edie pointed at it and then looked away, in the manner of someone pointing at something they'd been told not to look at directly. What's in there? Marisol asked. Dad doesn't let anyone go in. Okay. It was Mum's studio. Edie said it the way children say difficult things, plainly, quickly to get it over with. She painted, before she left. Marisol understood. She didn't say it. She just looked at the door for a moment and then said, Come on, let's see if there are any more markers in my bag. She forgot about the room. She was only human. 3 days later, while Edie was at her Thursday art class, Marisol was cleaning the upstairs hall and noticed the studio door was not in fact locked. She should have kept walking. She was 90% sure, later, that a reasonable person would have kept walking. She opened it. The room was a stopped clock. Canvases stacked against every wall, some finished, some half done. A drafting table with dried-up brushes still in a jar. Paint everywhere, splashed and dried. The room scattered with color like someone had painted the air itself. It smelled of linseed oil and something dusty and closed in. On the windowsill sat a small ceramic pot holding a single dried flower, and next to it a photograph. Beckett, much younger, laughing at something off camera, and a woman with red hair who had her arm around him and her eyes crinkled shut mid-law. Marisol stood in the middle of it all and thought, this is the most alive room in this house. Then she turned to leave and walked directly into the drafting table, which tipped, which sent the ceramic pot flying, which hit the hardwood floor and exploded into about 40 pieces. The sound was tremendous. She was on her knees collecting the shards when she heard Beckett's footsteps on the stairs. He'd come home early, hadn't heard the door, and then he was standing in the doorway, and his face had gone completely white. "What are you doing in here?" Not a question. He did that a lot. Marisol stood up slowly, shards in both hands. "I'm sorry. The door wasn't latched, and I looked in, and I shouldn't have, and then I knocked the table, and the pot. I'm so sorry. I'll replace it." "You can't replace it." His voice was very quiet, very even. "That was Edie's grandmother's. She gave it to us. Celine kept it in here because she said it made her feel like she was painting with company." He stopped. "I've kept this room exactly as she left it, for Edie, so that someday Edie could. So there would be something of her mother that was." He didn't finish. Marisol set the shards carefully on the drafting table. She thought about the 10 different wrong things she could say. She chose none of them. "Tell me what the pot looked like," she said. "What color was it?" Beckett stared at her. "Why?" "Because I want to try to fix it." "You can't." "Maybe not perfectly," she met his eyes, "but I want to try, for Edie." A long pause. Outside, a car went by on the wet street. October rain had come back, the way it always did. "It was blue," Beckett said finally, "small, with a white pattern around the rim, like little stars." Marisol nodded. "Okay." She didn't fix it that day, but she bought air-dry clay and blue paint on her way home, and spent her evening in her small Kitsilano apartment building something new. She was not a ceramicist. What she produced was imperfect, a little lopsided, the stars slightly uneven, but she had painted it with care, and you could tell. She brought it to the house the next morning. Edie saw it first. "You made this?" "I broke something and I tried to fix it. It's not the same as what was there before. But I thought, something new is better than nothing." Edie turned the little pot in her hands. She looked at the stars. "Did you use air-dry clay?" "I did." "I have air-dry clay," Edie said. "I can put little fish on it, to make it better." "I think that would make it much better." They were adding a small blobfish to the base of the pot when Beckett came downstairs and saw them both at the kitchen table, Edie with blue clay on her fingers, Marisol with blue paint on her forearm. Edie chattering about how the blobfish looks sad but is probably fine. It just has an unfortunate face. He stood in the doorway for a long time, long enough that Edie looked up. "Dad, Marisol fixed the pot. I'm making it better." Beckett looked at Marisol. She looked back at him, waiting. "You stayed," he said. "I said I would." He looked like he was going to say something else. His phone rang. He answered it, walked into his office, and closed the door. But before he did, she caught it. The exact moment his face did something it clearly didn't do very often. Something soft. The real trouble started 3 days after that, when Beckett's mother arrived. Genevieve Dunmore came from Victoria by the noon ferry, which she felt was already a significant sacrifice, and she arrived at the house in a cream-colored coat and the expression of a woman who has high standards and expects them to be disappointed. She was elegant in the way that came from decades of effort, hardened into habit. She kissed Beckett on both cheeks, said the house looked passable, and turned to find Marisol standing in the hallway in overalls with a blobfish sticker on her forearm, where Edie had put it without telling her. Genevieve's expression did not change. This was somehow worse than if it had. "This is the new housekeeper," she said to Beckett. "Household manager," Marisol said pleasantly. "Nice to meet you." Genevieve looked her up and down with the careful attention of someone doing an appraisal. "You have a sticker on your arm." "It's a blobfish. Edie put it there. It's a compliment." "I see." Genevieve turned to Beckett. "She's not at all what I expected." "What did you expect?" Marisol asked. A pause. "Someone with more." Genevieve selected the word with precision, formality. Marisol smiled. "And you look exactly like I expected." Beckett made a strangled sound. Edie, who had appeared at the top of the stairs, clapped her hand over her mouth. "I beg your pardon," Genevieve said. "Capable," Marisol said easily. "Organized. Someone who keeps things running. Edie described you. She said you were the most efficient person she'd ever met. I meant it as a compliment." Edie, from the stairs, gave Marisol a tiny double thumbs up that Genevieve could not see. Genevieve was not won over. Not yet. She spent the rest of that first afternoon conducting what amounted to a formal inspection of the house, the schedule and Marisol's qualifications, which she found both lacking and decidedly casual. She told Beckett privately, though Marisol because the kitchen had excellent acoustics, that the girl was inappropriate. Her methods were unstructured, and Edie needed consistency and routine, not craft activities and avocado tote bags. Beckett said nothing. But the next morning, Genevieve came downstairs early and found Edie sitting on the kitchen counter, while Marisol stood at the stove making proper oatmeal, and the two of them were having what appeared to be a completely serious discussion about whether a submarine or a hot air balloon would be more useful in an emergency. A submarine, Edie maintained, because you can hide. But a hot air balloon you can escape faster. Not if there are birds. What birds are attacking your hot air balloon? Emergency birds. You don't know what birds are going to do. Genevieve stood in the kitchen doorway long enough that Edie noticed her. "Grandma, we're deciding. Submarine or balloon in an emergency?" Genevieve straightened slightly. "That entirely depends on the nature of the emergency." Both Marisol and Edie looked at her. Edie said, "Okay, there are birds and water." "Then clearly a submarine," Genevieve said, with the conviction of a woman who had never once left an argument unfinished. Marisol handed her a mug of tea. Genevieve took it. Nobody acknowledged that this was a détente. The moment that changed everything happened 5 days into Genevieve's visit, and it involved a wasp. They had been out in the garden. Edie had insisted on showing her grandmother the earthworm she had named Gerald, and Genevieve had stepped too close to the fence post where a wasp had been conducting private business, and the wasp had expressed its displeasure directly to Genevieve's wrist. Genevieve did not scream. She was not the screaming type. She said, "Oh my word," and sat down on the garden bench, and her face went a particular shade of pale that suggested she might be one of those people for whom wasp stings were a more serious matter. Marisol was already moving. She got Genevieve inside, sat her at the kitchen table, checked the sting, confirmed there was no stinger left and no sign of serious allergic reaction, applied a cold compress and then a paste of baking soda and water, and talked calmly and steadily the entire time about exactly what she was doing and why. Genevieve sat very still and let herself be cared for. "Where did you learn that?" she asked, when the worst of it had passed. "My abuela was a nurse in Guadalajara before she came to Canada. She made sure all of us knew basic first aid before we were 12. She said not knowing was a kind of helplessness, and helplessness was preventable." Marisol smoothed a cool cloth over Genevieve's wrist. "You should feel better in half an hour. The swelling will go down." Genevieve was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother sounds formidable." She absolutely was. Marisol smiled. She also made the best tamales in Winnipeg, which is an extremely specific achievement, but she was proud of it. A pause. "She passed?" 6 years ago. She's the reason I wanted to teach. She said you give people tools or you give them nothing. Marisol rinsed the cloth. "I lost my teaching position when the school closed its program. I was going to go back in September, but things didn't work out, so here I am." Genevieve looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're a teacher." I'm not sure what the right tense is yet. Genevieve was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, with a precision that surprised Marisol, "Beckett's last housekeeper had a perfectly pressed uniform and left within 48 hours. The one before that had a letter of recommendation from the mayor and didn't last a week. And then there is you." "Here I am," Marisol said again. "Here you are," Genevieve agreed, and for the first time her voice held something that was not quite warmth but was adjacent to it. "Edie likes you." "I like her." "She hasn't liked anyone in a very long time." Genevieve straightened. "That is not a small thing." It was also that same week that Beckett stopped going back to his office after dinner. It happened gradually, unremarkably. One evening Edie demanded he judge a drawing competition between her current blobfish rendering and Marisol's attempt, which was, by everyone's honest assessment, much worse. He stayed for that. The next evening there was a debate about the best dinosaur, a topic on which Edie had very strong opinions, and somehow he ended up at the table for 45 minutes eating cold pasta and arguing the merits of the Ankylosaurus with a woman who had paint in her hair and was absolutely not backing down on the subject. The evening after that, Edie made him read 3 pages of her library book about ocean trenches out loud, in his best narrator voice, which was extremely stiff, and Marisol laughed at it in a way that was not unkind. Your dramatic reading voice sounds like you're presenting quarterly earnings, she said. I present quarterly earnings quite effectively. The anglerfish doesn't care about your Q3 numbers. He kept reading. He tried to make it more dramatic. Edie fell asleep before the chapter was done, and Marisol covered her with a blanket from the couch. And Beckett sat at the table and looked at his daughter's sleeping face and said nothing for a long time. She didn't sleep, he said finally quietly. For months. She'd wake up at 2-3 in the morning. I'd hear her. She never called for me. He paused. She just lay there. I could hear her on the monitor, just awake in the dark. Marisol sat down at the table across from him. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "that must have been so hard," the things people usually said. She just said, "She calls for you now." He looked at her. Not at 2 a.m., not like that. But she keeps checking. Where's Dad? When does Dad get home? Can Dad see this? Marisol folded her hands on the table. She had one solid thing taken away, so she's checking to make sure the other solid thing is still there. Beckett was quiet. Outside, it was raining again. It was always raining in October in Vancouver, a steady gray persistence. I didn't know she thought of me that way. She thinks of you in about 17 different ways, most of which she's drawn in that sketchbook. She draws your office a lot, actually, with you in it. She always draws the window. I think she likes the window. Beckett Dunmore, who had closed mergers with prime ministers and never once shown anything on his face that he hadn't chosen to show, looked at that moment very much like a person who was just barely holding something together. She showed you her sketchbook? She shows me everything. She's been waiting for someone to look. 2 days later, everything nearly fell apart at a dinner Beckett was hosting for his business partners. 3 associates from Ottawa and a very serious woman named Paula, who ran a rival firm and had agreed to explore a collaboration. They were all seated in the dining room when Edie appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, which she was not supposed to be in, at 7:30, which she was not supposed to be awake during, and announced loudly, "Dad, Marisol says that Paula is probably really tired from traveling, and could we do the rest of the meeting nicer and shorter?" Every head at the table turned. Paula looked up the stairs at Edie. Then she looked at Beckett. Then she laughed, a real short laugh, the kind you don't plan. Marisol appeared behind Edie at the top of the stairs looking frankly mortified. "I didn't. She wasn't supposed to, Edie. I said that in confidence." "What's confidence?" "Come here, please." Beckett made the fastest decision of his career. He looked at Paula and said, "She's not wrong. You've been in transit since 6 this morning. We can finish this over coffee on Friday." He looked at Marisol. "And you, come down." Both came down. Edie was introduced to everyone, shook hands with grave seriousness, and told Paula that her blazer was very good blue. Paula said thank you. The Ottawa associates seemed charmed in the helpless way that adults become helpless around children who are very direct. The meeting ended on excellent terms, early, and Paula sent an email the next morning that began, "Your household is an experience. Let's do Friday." Later, after everyone had gone, Beckett found Marisol in the kitchen doing dishes with her back to him. "You told my 7-year-old daughter that my business dinner was running long and the guest was tired. I told her that we should be considerate of people who'd had a long day," she extrapolated. She extrapolated in front of 4 executives. Marisol turned around. She looked like she was preparing an apology and also like she wasn't entirely convinced she owed one. "Is Paula coming on Friday?" A pause. "Yes." "Then, don't say it." I wasn't going to say anything. She was absolutely going to say something. They both knew it. Beckett leaned against the counter and looked at her across the kitchen. The avocado tote bag hanging on the chair, the mismatched socks, the blue paint that was always somewhere on her, the particular way she stood like she'd already decided she wasn't going to apologize for taking up space. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Make everything easier, lighter." He said it like the words tasted strange. "I've been in this house for 8 months feeling like I was managing a crisis. And you've been here 2 weeks and my daughter is sleeping through the night and arguing with my mother about submarines and adding blobfish to ceramics." Marisol was quiet for a moment. "I'm not doing anything special. I'm just present. I show up and I pay attention and I stay." She paused. That's all she needed. Someone to stay. The kitchen was very quiet. "Marisol," he said her name slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. "I need to tell you something. If you're going to fire me..." "I'm not going to fire you." "Then go ahead." "I think I am." He stopped, looked at the counter, looked at her. "I don't do this, say things like this, but I think..." "Dad," Edie's voice from the stairs. Both of them turned. She was standing on the third step in her pajamas, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her dark eyes moving between the two adults in the kitchen. "I made something." She came down and opened the sketchbook on the kitchen table. It was a drawing in marker, the careful, deliberate kind that had obviously taken a long time. A house, the way she always drew houses, but this one had lights in every window. 2 figures outside it, one tall and one shorter. And inside the house, visible through the drawn windows, a third figure, smaller, with a blobfish sticker on her arm. At the bottom, in 7-year-old handwriting, "Our house now." Marisol's hand went to her mouth. Edie looked up at her. "You can have it," she said, with the solemn generosity of someone offering the thing they value most. "So you know where you live." Beckett looked at the drawing. He looked at Marisol. She was crying. She was trying not to, the way adults try not to cry in front of children, pressing her lips together and breathing through her nose, but her eyes were completely full. Edie looked alarmed and reached out to pat her arm. "It's okay," Edie said. "It's a good house." Marisol laughed through it. "It's the best house." Beckett crossed the kitchen, took the drawing from the table, and looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Marisol. The rain had stopped outside, finally, and the kitchen was warm and bright, and Edie was watching both of them, with an expression of absolute, patient intent. "She's right," he said. "It's a good house." He set the drawing down and reached out and took Marisol's hand, the one still covered in blue paint from the afternoon, and held it. "And I think I'd like you to stay in it, longer than a contract, longer than all of it," he exhaled. "I know that is an entirely impractical and slightly terrifying thing to say to someone who has worked for you for 2 weeks. 16 days, Marisol said. 16 days. That's longer." She looked at their joined hands, the blue paint, the warmth of it. "I was in love with you by day 4, if we're being honest, the night you put Edie's blanket on and came back to check 4 times. I saw you on the monitor." He stared at her. "You could see the monitor?" "It's in the kitchen. I had an early morning." A pause. "That's extremely embarrassing." "It was extremely kind." Edie looked at both of them. She had the expression of someone who has been patient long enough. "Are you going to kiss now?" "Because that's usually what happens at this part." "What part?" Beckett said. "This part." Edie gestured at the kitchen with the air of a director. "The part where everything is decided." He kissed her. It was not quite what Edie had choreographed in her head, probably. It was quiet, careful, the kind of first kiss that is also a promise, but Edie seemed satisfied. She picked up the drawing from the table and went to put it on the fridge, where it hung beside nothing, because there had been nothing on the fridge before. Now there was. 3 months later, the house on West 37th Avenue looked different. There were drawings on the fridge, there were shoes by the door, there was a ceramic pot on the windowsill of the studio, blue with white stars and a small clay blobfish at the base. And the studio itself was no longer locked. Edie went in on Sundays with her sketchbook and painted at the drafting table, while Marisol read on the window seat, both of them comfortable in the particular silence of people who are simply glad to be in the same room. Genevieve came back for Christmas, and upon seeing the state of the house, colorful, loud, a pair of cloud print socks drying on the radiator, said good once, with a completeness that meant something, and helped Edie build a paper lantern for the tree. On the last day of the year, Beckett and Marisol stood on the back porch, while Edie was inside teaching Genevieve the correct way to name an anglerfish, their voices audible through the kitchen window. He had something in his coat pocket. Marisol could see the shape of it and was pretending she couldn't. 16 days, he said. She looked at him. What? You said it was 16 days, when I asked. He reached into his pocket and held it out. A small box, plain, no ceremony. He'd learned from watching Marisol that plain and honest was better than grand and calculated. It's been 112 more since then, and I want a lot more than that. Edie had appeared at the window. Marisol could see her inside, nose to the glass, breath fogging the pain. Genevieve had appeared beside her and had, with enormous dignity, taken out a handkerchief. Marisol looked at the box, looked at Beckett, looked at the small, round face fogging the kitchen window. "You are the most unlikely person," she said. "I know. You didn't know how to draw a blobfish 3 months ago. I still can't, honestly." She took the box from his hand, opened it, looked at the ring, simple, not showy, with a small blue stone that was the precise color of the paint she always seemed to be covered in. "You matched it to the paint," she said. "I went to 3 jewelers before I found the right blue." He paused. "Apparently it's called cerulean. Edie told me which one." Inside the kitchen, Edie had both hands pressed flat to the glass. Genevieve had folded her arms in the manner of someone who has decided they are invested and is not ashamed of it. Marisol looked up. "Yes," she said, "obviously yes." She had her mismatched socks on under her boots, one with clouds, one with little cacti, and when she stepped forward and he held her, the kitchen window behind them burst into sound. Edie cheering, Genevieve telling her to mind the lanterns, and the last of the year ticking quietly past. The house on West 37th Avenue had lights in every window, exactly as Edie had drawn it. Some things, if you wait long enough for the right person, turn out exactly the way they should.